Hi, this is Robert O'Reilly. My name is Gowron. Honor to you and your house. You're listening to Trek FM.
Earl Grey hot.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Earl Grey, Trek FM's dedicated podcast to the next generation. I'm your host, Amy Nelson, and joined with me today are Lee Hutchison and Richard Marquez. Hey guys, say hello to our listeners.
Hello, listeners.
Hello, listeners.
Well, it is our third episode, and, we haven't told you our Trek story, so we thought today we would let you know a little bit of how we came into Star Trek, into Trek FM, and what we hope for the future. So, let's start with you, Richard. What was your first introduction to Star Trek, and when did you know you loved it?
Well, my first episode that I've ever watched was Tin Man. I remember, like it was yesterday, I was sitting there on the floor of my parents' living room, and this was back in the early 90s. I'm not exactly sure when exactly that was, but yeah, it was it was the very first one I've ever seen before. I remember just sitting there and obviously throwing whatever I had during the commercials, because I was like, no, what's going on next? What's going on? I think really from the get-go, I was a Star Trek fan since I was a little kid. It's been growing ever since. So yeah, Tin Man was my first episode, and that's when I started loving Star Trek.
Awesome. Well, Lee, what about you?
Yeah, Star Trek was always a few years behind America, and I was maybe 6 or 7 when I first fell in love with Star Trek. Next Generation would always be on BBC Two on Wednesday nights, I think, and I would come home, and I can't remember the first episode I watched or anything like that, but I remember just falling for Next Generation. I was just kind of head over heels. I spoke about like missing out on seeing Star Trek Generations in 1994 at the tender age of 7, and yeah, Next Generation was just a show I loved, and I'll always remember it because you can tell my parents were not Star Trek fans or knew anything about it. I think it was maybe my 7th birthday, and I kind of came down, opened my presents, and I got on video Star Trek The Final Frontier, and I was like, okay, brilliant, Star Trek. I didn't know it was going to be a bit of an uneven movie, as it were, and I got an action figure, so I was thinking, ooh, what could it be? Could it be a Picard? Could it be Data? Could it be one of these amazing action characters? Open it and it's Dr. Noonien Soong. So this little 7-year-old boy has potentially the worst ever Star Trek movie on VHS, and an old man in a brown outfit costume. Somehow I managed to continue to be a Star Trek fan. I always remember a few years after, or in and around that time, we lived up in the countryside in the north of Scotland, and we were down for like a wee family break in Edinburgh, and I've still got it. Like, there was a Star Trek museum in Edinburgh at the time, kind of the uniforms, some of the props and costumes. I remember just running through this place looking at the stuff, but I was just so excited to get to the gift shop to be able to pick toys and videos. And I remember the one I got Picard and his like jacket with the grey underneath, and I got on video Masks and Eye of the Beholder. So you could say I was a bit cursed with my VHS picks as a kid for being a Star Trek fan. Somehow to this day I still like Star Trek, despite the fact I was going against the grain in terms of what I was able to watch.
Definitely.
What about yourself, Amy?
Well, I think I've mentioned this before on Patrons Roundtable. Star Trek Next Generation was where I started, and it came on Sunday nights. And my mom was watching it and she really enjoyed The Next Generation. And I was just walking past and she's like, hey, come sit down and watch the show with me. And I was hooked. It was cause and effect and just hooked right then and there. My younger brother, who's actually 8 years younger than me, he was really into Star Trek, the original series. And he was in a Star Trek club and went to conventions. And I was just like, what are you doing? What is this? And then I fell in love with Next Generation and sort of just enjoyed it completely since then. So that was our introduction. But then when did it really turn into a fandom, this passion that you have that you are willing to podcast for, Lee?
I think it's the fact that it's been a consistency in my life for I'm 29, 30 next year, and pretty much most of my life. As long as I've been kind of watching programs and TV, I've loved Star Trek. I've watched Star Trek in religious order almost from kind of 93. A TV show comes on the air, I watch it that week. I watch the movie, it comes out. It's been something that it's not like I've maybe come into Star Trek late where it's like, what's this Deep Space Nine? I'm going to binge watch all that. I binge watched all these shows over 7 years. Everything's in my brain. I'm used to waiting a week at a time to watch an episode, waiting the 3 years for a new movie. It's been something that I can talk about and I know all about. Like, I'm not arrogant when I say that. Like, I have an opinion on most things on Star Trek because it's been there when, I had only really one friend that was a Star Trek fan kind of growing up and into my kind of 20s really, until I met some other Star Trek fans in the flesh. And, I had all these opinions and views on Star Trek that were stored up, or I maybe shared them on Trek BBS boards or things like that. So I've always given an opinion or had an opinion on Star Trek because waiting a week at a time gives you that. It's like, take Lost, for example. You binge watch that over a month and you can talk about Lost broadly. But if you watched Lost week to week, you'd be going, oh, you won't believe what happened in that episode. An episode that seemed so minor and inconsequential, you would have an opinion on. It would come to the Monday morning and you'd be like, wow, can you believe what happened yesterday? What do you think that means? So I've always had that kind of relationship with Star Trek where I've always wanted to talk about it. I can talk about it. And it's something I'll never stop talking about because I'm still passionate about it to this day, and taking part in this podcast will allow me more avenues to talk about it, be inventive with it, and explore my history with Trek.
Definitely. And what about you, Richard?
Probably about, I don't know, 3, maybe 4 years. No, probably longer than that. 5 or 6 years ago, my fandom really didn't start taking off to the point where it's at now. Well, mainly because for some reason I just drew back to it. I probably because of Star Trek 09 is probably when it happened around, and and maybe go back and revisit basically every single episode that I've ever watched. I mean up to that point I already watched them, but I can't even remember the last time before 09 that when I rewatched all the episodes like I'm doing now over and over again. But it's just like Lee, I had no one to talk to about it, and from the first time I watched Tin Man to 09, and really I didn't talk to anyone about it because people make fun of Trekkies, and that's fine and whatnot, but I mean, like, it's you just don't want to go into it because there's always that fear of being made fun of, or at least on my end it was. But then when 09 came out, I was like, oh, nerd flag, throw it out like it's a penalty flag, and it's like, no, this is it. We're going all in, and I just like what Lee was saying, that I had a die-cast Enterprise that separated. The one I can't remember who made it. I still have it somewhere in one of these boxes. I still can't find it to this day. But like I was in England as well, and it was on BBC as well when my dad was stationed over there in England, and it was like you said Lee, it was Wednesdays on BBC. You wait for that next episode, and it's just nerve-wracking sometimes. But yeah, and then of course, we're up to now, and I'm excited.
It is. It's a very exciting time right now. I started actually, it was around 2000, and I had just finished up university and was starting teaching. And as a new teacher, I was like, oh my gosh, how am I going to decorate your room? Because part of that is, to get the good learning environment. And my brother, he knew that I'd like Next Generation and stuff, but, I was just watching it on TV. And, we sort of talked about Voyager. He really likes Voyager. And so, I would just, watch it on TV, but it wasn't really a passion of mine. And then when I got my classroom, my brother gave me a whole bunch of posters and all of his little knickknacks and characters and action figures and stuff. And so I had a corner in my room, and I had Enterprise D hanging from the ceiling. And it was just a really good conversation point that's where, okay, this is what I'm going to like. And, geek flag raising loud. And it's been in my classroom for the past 16 years. I have a corner always dedicated, and it's getting larger. And especially when, have open house or parents' night, and they'd come into my room, oh, you like Star Trek? Yeah. And so, that was a good opening to get on good grounds with those parents. And every year I have had a kid come in, hey, my dad saw that you like Star Trek and wanted to give you this. And so my collection has just started growing as with my passion for it, because I've always been able for the past 16 years to talk about it, with other people and, other teachers or what have you, that's, what I love. And it really came in when Next Generation came out on DVD in 2004, I think it was. And I was watching those, just consuming them. And I would have to wait. And that end of Best of Both Worlds, I had to wait for like a couple weeks till the next season came out. It's like, even though I knew what had happened, but yeah, it was suspense. And I was staying up way past my bedtime, just, one more episode. And so that was my binge watch, was when those DVDs came out. And I would just continually watch them. And, this is before Netflix or anything. So that's really 2004, just watching and consuming all the episodes on DVD was really where my passion really came through.
I remembered when the DVDs came out as well. Like I had quite a bit of the videos, and I was like, right, I need to get these DVDs. I want the special features. I want them on the discs. And I remembered one night, me and my friends were in this Aberdeen casino, and I started making a bet with myself while betting that every time I got the money from like winning hands at blackjack, that if it was enough to get a Star Trek box set, that was going to be it, that I would just put that away. I wouldn't gamble that anymore. So I think it was like about, 30, 35 pounds a box set. There we go. I've won a hand, £35, right? That's in the pocket. That's me bought season 1. A few more rounds, that's season 2. I think I managed to get like 4 seasons or something out of that night. So the next day I went back and picked up a few of the DVD box sets, and I remembered like kind of a few months later I went off to uni, and I had this tiny little flat, this little room. I had brought a TV, and I brought some Star Trek VHS box sets. I remember that first night, away from home and somewhere totally alien, and just putting on one of those Star Trek DVDs. So they as much as all the other things, the TV and the videos have been a cornerstone of my existence, the DVDs continue to play a key role as well for myself.
Yeah, you mentioned that buying all the DVDs. I actually remember going back to like 2002. In October of 2002, I broke my ankle in a parachute jump, and I was in Italy on bed rest basically for about, I don't know, 3 or 4 months or something like that. And all I remember is going to the Power Zone on the base, it's the local electronics store. and trying to find all these Star Trek series, and of course they come out like one at a time. It's like, I'm sitting here, I can blow through the whole entire season in one night, or maybe two. But like it was just, I mean they're $60 a piece, so for us it's $60, or at least back in 2002 it was. And I actually still have those DVDs sitting in my entertainment center that I still even watch to this day, because I am not going to open up my Deep Space Nine when I already have the DVD versions and get those Blu-rays, and well, not the Deep Space Nine, but the TNG ones.
Yeah, I keep them at school as part of my collection. But then when I went home, my mother was like, hey, because she was the one who introduced me. She said, bring me those Next Generation DVDs. And she just recently did a rewatch, and it was so fun, talking to her about it. And so she still has a love for Next Generation too. Also at that time, in my local library, they had an entire section of Star Trek books. And that's also when I consumed a lot of the fiction there and reading all the books. And it was so great that the library had them all there. It was just a whole section of Star Trek. And I would just go, and I started just reading book after book after book. They were so good. And then when the library had the books on sale, I bought them for a quarter each and started making my own collection of books. Did you guys get into the books at all?
I read one where it was like the Enterprise was like, looked like it was going to crash into the planet, but I've never really been interested in the literary universe of Star Trek, the expanded seasons and season 8s and what happened between movies. I really don't find that type of books personally appealing, because I'm more of a non-fiction fan. Ask me about Star Trek non-fiction books, totally on board with that. You had the Next Generation Companion, I had some behind the scenes books on the Next Generation, things like that I totally lapped up. But in terms of kind of the stories of it, I had picked up one or two over the years when I was a kid, but it was something that was it just wasn't for me personally.
I ended up liking a few of the authors, but I liked it because the books were just like a little episode. They were very episodic in nature, and just, here's a little episode, and most of what I read was, set within the 7 series, So what about you, Richard? Any reading books?
For the most part, it's recently, I've been reading the recent books, not really the older books. One of my favorite was the Time for One Pact that came out in 2010, 2012, as well as The Fall. Actually, funny enough, my favorite book out of all the books that have come out since then, and those that I've read, is The Poison Chalice. And I absolutely, just like what you said, when you're reading these books, even Peaceable Kings is the next one after that, and it just felt like an entire episode. And I'm not a fast reader, but when I'm reading these books, I get through them in about an hour or two, and it's like, and my fiance gets through books like in an hour or two as well, like a 500-page book, and she's done. I'm like, what the hell? And then I'm trying to read the same book, and it takes me 5 days, whereas a Star Trek book, it takes me about an hour or two, and where for her, it takes 5 days. So, yeah. So I'm getting into it. There we go.
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering, Richard, when did you find Trek FM?
Well, I found the network about, let's see, it's November right now, or no, it's December right now. I just had my 2-year anniversary as the production manager, and I believe it was April about 2.5 years ago, 2 years ago, that I found that for some reason I get introduced into podcasts by a friend of mine, and I was like, you know what? Let's find Star Trek stuff on podcasts. Let's see what's out there. I doubted there's going to be anything on there, and then lo and behold, I find To the Journey, and it was my first taste to Trek FM, and from about April until November, I was a listener. And then Chris got the new job as the editor-in-chief, and he needed someone to basically pick up the slack, and I applied, and there we go. The rest is history.
Yay!
And then now we're here.
So you came in with To the Journey, huh?
I did. Yeah, I did.
All right, we'll forgive you. Lee, how did you find Trek FM?
Yeah, a few years ago, I came in a different way. As I say, I love Star Trek. You know, it's one of my top loves. But for me, I'm a cinema lover first and foremost when it comes to film. And I was a listener, a disciple of Mike Schindler. I listened to Commentary, Track Stars, his movie podcast. And then I kind of stumbled onto Trek FM through that connection and listening to his shows because, while I'm incredibly passionate about Star Trek, I could relate very much to, say, Commentary Trek Stars because as a kid and a teenager and then as an adult, if someone involved in the making of Star Trek or in any capacity made another movie or a TV show or a book or whatever, I would check that out. You know, I've followed Ronald D. Moore. I've met him a few times at conferences here in Edinburgh, and yeah, like I'm as much as I love, you know, talking about Star Trek, I was one of those shows that I loved people that liked Star Trek not talking about Star Trek and talking about movies because that's what I like. You know, I know that may sound like a contradiction. Here I am on a show talking about the Next Generation. I can talk about the Next Generation, but you can get me talking about films, and I'm just as passionate about that. And the idea that there was Trek fans that shared an interest in kind of the more obtuse and less known TV shows and movies that the guys liked, whether it was something like Carnival, you know, and other things that they talk about on kind of Stage 9, for example. You know, it's one of my favorite podcasts in general, not just like a kind of favorite Trek FM show. So kind of where they go, I tend to follow. Even tomorrow, with podcasting here, it's like kind of 9 o'clock at night in the UK. They asked if, do you want to, like, Zero Dark 30 is one of my favorite movies, and they went, do you want to come on and talk about it? No, it's Tomorrow Never Dies we're talking about tomorrow. Do you want to come on and talk about Tomorrow Never Dies? Yeah, sure. What time? Oh, it's going to be 2 a.m. Do you want to do it? Yeah, because I love hearing those guys, and like I consider them friends. We podcast on another network together. We interact, and so yeah, that's where I kind of came from through. It wasn't necessarily Star Trek that brought me to Trek FM. It was anything but Star Trek in a way. So yeah. What about yourself?
Well,
Amy?
I found the network actually. I had an iPhone, and then I had a update for the OS, and so I updated it, and then there was this little purple icon. What's this thing called? Podcasts. So that had to have been, 2 years ago. And I thought, what do I like? And it was either Utah football or Star Trek. And so I searched Star Trek Next Generation, and there Earl Grey popped up. And, just devoured those episodes and listened to all their back catalog and was like, they keep mentioning this Trek FM. And so I searched Trek FM and found the 602 Club with Matthew Rushing, and he was just, he's such a nice, amazing person, and was so welcoming. And I was like, what's this Babel conference? And so I started making more comments, and it just seemed like everyone welcomed me. And I'm like, there's people out there that like Star Trek as much as I do. And really felt just so welcomed within Trek FM. I didn't even, it's funny because I hear other people, on other Facebook group pages, I'm like, there's other Facebook group pages? No, that we only have the Babel conference because that's all that I need. And so, yeah, it was Earl Grey, 602 Club, and then I just started listening to everything. The Commentary Track Stars, and then now the Stage 9, listen to those, and now there's just so many to listen to. It's amazing. I really enjoy Melodic Treks. I listened to it before when it was Colin, and now Brandon does it. And I just... The Ready Room, I love it when Larry Nemechek comes on with Chris Jones. They're amazing together. And plugging all of our shows, but I really have listened to them all. And Earl Grey was so passionate about To the Journey. And so I was like, well, I don't really know that much. But I'll just listen every once in a while. And they are just fabulous. Love To the Journey and excited to have them come back on with the new hosts. And The Orb, again, I haven't watched that much Deep Space Nine, but, when they did their Worf episode, I listened. And I just love listening to Matthew and Chris's voice. They're so smooth and they're so good. So I really, when I found Trek FM, just really came into it. And then I started becoming a patron and donating, and then they started their patrons roundtable, and so I was like, well, I'll try it out. I mean, I don't do any of this thing, but they said, oh, you can just do it on your iPad, and I was like, well, okay, I'll try it. And again, everyone was just so welcoming, Aaron, Harvey, and everyone was just so nice that I really feel that it's a good community to be in, to explore, and it continues your fandom in a very nice way. What other shows do you listen to currently now, Richard?
Well, the 602 Club is actually the one I've been listening to quite a bit. It's, talking about just straight up Star Trek, it kind of gets, I don't want to say stale. That's not the correct word, but let's just go with stale.
Or monotonous.
Monotonous. There you go. Monotonous. Perfect. But it's just, I don't want to always talk about Star Trek, because I have a lot of friends that I post on Facebook, and they see, oh, you're just a fan of Star Trek. I'm like, no. I'm also, a fan of MCU, DC, and Dune, and all these other kinds. It's just not Star Trek. It's just not as interesting. But anyway, I actually have been a fan of the 602 Club for quite a while. Actually, since its beginning. Actually, when the show started, I was the production manager, and it was actually my first show that I pushed out the door. But I absolutely love the 602 because it's everything other than Star Trek as well. So on top of Star Trek.
Yeah, that's a good point, and then that's why I listen to it. It gives you a break, and it's a really good show.
Very.
I like Metatreks too. I'm glad that Zach and Mike came on for that. That's a good podcast too.
That is a good show. I absolutely love their last. Well, not the last show, but the last one I listened to was the religious. I think they did an author review of a book, and they were talking about how Star Trek fits into Christianity or spirituality or something like that. And oh my God, that was one of the very few that I go all the way through and understand everything what's going on, especially Metatreks. It's like Ken has said in the Babel conference that he's never learned so many vocabulary words, and me too. I'm in the same boat. I'm like, huh?
Yeah, Stage 9 I listen to each and every week because they're like my soulmates. I listen to them and it's like, yeah, I know them, yeah, and they know me in terms of how they talk and how they interact and everything like that, and it's totally on board with how I think about movies and so on like that. And I think that's kind of, it's definitely my favorite. For me, I dip in here and there depending on the episode, because I listen to a lot of podcasts, and filling my kind of whole weekly schedule and commutes with kind of Star Trek ones would just burn me out. That by the time we get to Sunday to talking about Star Trek, there'd be too much in my head. I've loved it, and I think it's been incredible what Mike's done. From There to Here has been brilliant for a daily dose, and I'm going to miss that when it ends at the end of the month. But outside of Star Trek, I've got so many passions, interests, and kind of niche things that I'm into that Star Trek's only really kind of one of them. So while I'm, a regular listener of Trek FM in general, I'll, listen to a couple of shows from a couple of the shows other shows a week. I always like to just keep up my interests in other things as well. So when I come to talk about the Next Generation, it's not necessarily through the prism of all I think about and do is watch Star Trek and think about Star Trek and listen to Star Trek and then come and talk about it. I think listening to other things as well brings a different perspective, and I learn from that about kind of the larger world, that so many things, for example, like I'm a huge football fan, real football, none of this American football nonsense. So,
come on now.
I listen to football podcasts, and I guest on one here and there every so often. Huge politics fan, listen to a lot of politics podcasts, a lot of geek culture podcasts that kind of touch upon different things, whether it's film, indie cinema, frame rates, all these different things. I like to keep it kind of diverse what I'm listening to, and while Trek FM offers diverse listening of Star Trek and things like that, for my own kind of being fresh to come into a perspective on Star Trek, religiously follow Melodic Treks, and because I love the Star Trek music, and Stage 9 because it's like they watch the films that I love to watch and love hearing people talk about. So that keeps me fresh for a Sunday when we record TNG.
Excellent. All right. Well, I just have one last question. Now that we know each other's past and history on Star Trek, what do you hope for the future of Star Trek? Richard?
Oh, what a great question. I'm very optimistic for the future of Star Trek. It's I hear all this bad news. Recently Brian Fuller leaving, and saying he's not ever going to come back or whatnot. But I mean, it's just what a way to say to the rest of the writers that are still on, oh yeah, you're not going to do great Star Trek. It's like, no, I'm very optimistic about the new Star Trek movies. I back in 2009 when I watched the first, the first of the Kelvin universe, I was not really optimistic, I was optimistic before I watched the film. After the film, I hate it. Absolutely hate it. I mean, you talk to me about it, I would rant and rant and rant and on how terrible it was, because at that time I was a purist when it came to Star Trek. If it was outside of Kirk, Picard, Sisko, Janeway, it didn't matter. It was wrong. And then when I found Trek FM, Norman actually set me straight. We had a long discussion about 09 as well as Into Darkness. Actually, I think Into Darkness just came out when I started listening to Trek FM, and yeah, I mean, listening to him and talking to him about the new Star Trek, and we're trying to get fans in. We're trying to, or at least the franchise is trying to get new fans in. And then, eventually they're going to talk and maybe even watch the old episodes in the past and become even bigger fans. Because, once I adopted that thinking, I actually, for some reason, I started loving 09, Star Trek 09, as well as Into Darkness. And, and I absolutely love Beyond. But yes. I've run into so many fans, younger kids, younger kids, probably in their, probably just about early 20s. And it's amazing that, it's like every time I talked about Star Trek, it was older people. Always. Someone 10, 15, 20, 30, a billion years, I don't know. When I was younger, it was a billion years. But I always talk to people that were older, and it's like, oh, okay, that's great, And then when I talk to someone that's younger, it's like, wow, you're a Star Trek fan? Really? do you know what's involved? And it's even more amazing for those fans who are just getting into it. It's so exciting. I mean, the last guy I talked to, I had a Star Trek hoodie on, and he was like, oh, he stopped me in the middle of PetSmart, I think it was, and we started talking Star Trek and just he never heard of the TOS or TNG or even Voyager or Enterprise. And it's like, holy cow, dude, I'm excited for you. You're going to go all, if you love '09 and you want to know more, I'm excited for you. I'm really excited for you. So yeah, I'm very optimistic and I can't wait for the new series.
Yeah, that's, because I've had my Star Trek corner in my classroom, and there's, my kids know I love it, and they sort of dismiss it. Oh, my dad watches it, blah, blah, blah. But I have had a couple kids come up and say, Miss Nelson, I've started watching Star Trek, and some of them start all the way at the original series. And so they come and talk to me, and then they're sending me emails of little memes and clips and stuff, and then some of them start with Next Generation, because that's my favorite, and that's the one I talk about. But those that are actually watching the episodes, and more frequently now because of the movies, like you said, they're more interested in it, and when the Beyond came out, the starting of the school year, the kids, they just loved it. And they said, oh, yeah, it was good. And they were telling me, well, they like this one, or they liked '09, or they liked Into Darkness. Actually, it was funny because a lot of my students like Into Darkness over Beyond. And I thought,
really?
Wow, okay. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, that is very interesting.
But yeah, it's fun to, see it through their eyes for the first time. That's really fun.
Yeah, for me, I'm going to pick up on the Into Darkness point because it kind of ties in for me. When I've seen Star Trek Into Darkness with friends that were never Star Trek fans, and I went to the IMAX triple bill when Star Trek Beyond came out, and Star Trek Into Darkness is my non-Trekkie friends' favorite of the three, because I for all its flaws, and I've discussed it on my own podcast before. There's a lot to enjoy and a lot to get out of this movie. I think it's a bit unfairly savaged, and people let some rather large issues that are kind of minor in the grand scheme of the film, let it kind of go all over. I mean, that's a debate for another day. I don't really want to obviously go into that, because we've all been bored to death probably by now of the Into Darkness debate and stuff. That's not for tonight. But for me, I think of when I was kind of a child, and I had only the one friend really that was into Star Trek, and that was our whole thing was we'd run around the playground as little primary school kids playing Star Trek. We'd pretend that we were on the Enterprise D. That was our favorite show together. We'd run around playing it. All the other kids were playing football, and we were kind of nerds. No one really hung out with us. We're kind of the cliche nerds. And then as kind of a teenager, I kind of drifted a bit from Star Trek, and I pretended one time when I went to see Star Trek Nemesis that I was actually off to see Elf instead, because that sounded cooler than seeing Star Trek Nemesis. Maybe it still is. And but more so when I think of kind of the recent kind of past few years, that the current movies have had their detractors, but people that aren't necessarily Star Trek fans, for better or worse, really like those movies and go to see them. That the idea that Star Trek should cater just to fans like myself, people like Amy, all these people that have been there, they're going to turn up anyway, you can't survive off that alone. And I think the testament is that when I go see a new Star Trek movie, is I can text my friends and go, guys, I'm going to get tickets for the midnight screening of Star Trek Beyond. You want to come? Sure. I mean, they'll never seen the Whale movie, they'll never watched an episode of the TV show, but you know what? They'll turn up. They'll go to those movies, and that's incredible. As someone that never would have convinced anyone to watch a Star Trek show, that's it. We're all going to turn up anyway. We'll still agree, disagree, bicker, and have insight or constructive criticism on all these movies, Star Trek Discovery, what's going on behind the scenes, and that's fine. But you need other people that are coming in, the fresh blood. And there's so many people that you see online that Star Trek '09 was either a rebirth for their fandom, like, wow, this is awesome, I forgot how great Star Trek was, or people that have gone, Star Trek's not as nerdy and rubbish as I thought. I thought it was all kind of styrofoam sets and wonky costumes and foreheads. It's a massive injection into fandom, and that's been reflected in the box office. People saying Star Trek Beyond was a box office disaster. By what stretch of the imagination? What, compared to Captain America 16? no, it was a success. Granted, it could have done better, but it was one of those summers. And being a fan of film and not just Star Trek, I can kind of take a step back and put it in that kind of context. And I think Star Trek will continue to do that, and I'm very excited about where that's going to go, what that's going to do. I'm excited to be able to play a key role and being able to talk about it with people and have that ability, because, just because I'm here on a podcast and I'm downloaded on your phone doesn't mean my opinion is any less or more important than the listeners. I think the feedback in some of the sections is just as critical as ours. Yeah, we just have a platform to say it, and for better or worse, the comment section is people's platform. So I think as long as people are still fascinated, interested, loving it, then it can only be better. Because I look back to 2002, Enterprise was in the doldrums. Star Trek was cancelled for the first time in my lifetime. As someone that was born in 1987, that was born into the Next Generation, born into movies, to have that cancelled was crazy. Now look at it. People always said the past few years, I would pay $10 to have Star Trek come back. Dreams can come true. Like, new Star Trek's coming. I'm as excited about this casting as ever. I'm excited to podcast about it. I'm excited to go to see Star Trek films with friends. That's going to be the continued next 25 years, 50 years. It's going to keep going, and it's going to be very interesting to see where that goes and the generations of fans that come in. The Blu-rays, Deep Space Nine being the show that was kind of overlooked when it was on the air by some, is now considered the best Star Trek. It's amazing. I can't wait to see what the next few years bring.
Yeah, I too am very excited for the future of Star Trek. You look back, these 50 years, and just so excited for these new movies, the Kelvin timeline that brings in the new fans. And in the rewatch, so many people have done their rewatches and gone through series, and I did mine for Enterprise, and just every single episode I was like, how come I didn't like this at the beginning? I watched a few here and there, but just going through and finding what you love in Trek. And one of the things that for me speaks to me and that I'm looking forward to with the continued movies, because I think the movies did a really good job, as well as telling good stories with morals and a hope for a better future. And also, giving the social commentary on humanity and what we can do to improve. I love those episodes of Star Trek when they do that and makes you self-reflect on, how can we be better individuals, better as a society. And I see that a lot in these new movies, and I have a great hope for that for these the upcoming series next year for Discovery. And I love that about Star Trek, because that's, it's also a great show just to sit and watch and enjoy the battles and, but the dialogue and the commentary and the character development is all what makes Star Trek for me. And so I'm really looking forward for that in the future.
Do you incorporate Star Trek into your lesson plans?
Oh, yes. There are many times when we do. We actually, Friday, we were talking about exponential growth and decay, and we were talking about how population, grows exponentially. And will there ever be a maximum? And so we were talking about that. And some of my kids, they're so funny. They're like, no, there's no maximum. I said, well, we have limited resources here on Earth. And they're like, yeah, but we're going to go out into outer space. So they're pretty funny that way. But yeah, I do. There have been specific lessons that I use to teach math.
Nice. I love that. I would love that class.
Yeah, it's not so much none of my students are into Star Trek at all. But I kind of wriggle it in here and there with a little moral lesson or a kind of parable through a Star Trek prism. So I'm not able to be so kind of on the point with it. This Star Trek story would really help you in this situation that you're bringing to me right now. I have to be a bit more creative about how I approach it, as opposed to, well, let me tell you this story about this android. But yeah, it certainly informs how I do it. And then in terms of the counselling, I certainly take on points, not necessarily of how Deanna Troi represents counseling, but in terms of kind of how someone like Picard deals with people and giving people kind of opportunities to talk and to be heard and to be listened and to have those worries acted upon. And it's not necessarily the counselor character that informs that part of my kind of day-to-day life.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm grateful that Star Trek is such a large franchise, because even though, the majority of my kids haven't seen it, they know enough about the characters that it's ingrained into our society. Everyone knows Kirk and Spock, and then they know most of the Next Generation just because I talk about them in the beginning of the year and stuff. But yeah, there's been more likely just, the idea of Star Trek. There have been a couple episodes when they're in the holodeck and they say end program, and then it goes to the grid system. And I usually show a clip during that when I'm teaching the Cartesian coordinate plane, stuff like that. So,
do you incorporate Star Trek into your day-to-day life, or have you ever incorporated it in a situation where you were under a lot of stress or trouble in kind of the Far East or anything like that, Richard?
That's interesting you say that, because I was actually thinking about Amy on her classroom, because like the most I can do, the most Star Trek I do is like, I can't talk about it in my profession, but because all we do is work. But like I talk to my daughter a lot, and when it comes to like lessons and whatnot, and of course I always get an eye roll, so yeah. But that's my daughter. But like when you talk about episodes, I mean, like if we're talking about like feel good episodes, or at least uplifting, one of my, I know it's going to be probably not an episode that everyone will probably think of to uplift them, but In the Pale Moonlight is an episode that I always go to when things are not going right. For some reason, I don't know why why that episode is my favorite when it comes to those kind of situations, but like yeah, I mean, I watched that, and when I was in even when I was in Iraq, because I deployed in 2003, April of 2003. No, yeah, April of 2003, and I actually brought my DVDs of Star Trek, like two or three seasons or something like that. And when we actually got into garrison over there in Iraq, and we had downtime, I would pull out my portable DVD player and actually watch those episodes. So, or at least the seasons, I think it was 5, 6, and 7 of Deep Space Nine were the ones I really watched, because TNG wasn't out at that time. Or at least if they were, they weren't sold at whatever store I went to. But definitely the Pale Moonlight. Not a great episode, but it's a good overall.
It's the best episode of Star Trek. Potentially, yes.
All right, guys. Well, it has been so good hearing and sharing our Trek story. But that isn't the only topic we've been talking about here on the network. Here's a quick look at what you might have missed elsewhere on Trek FM.
Previously on Trek.fm, Melodic Treks.
Now, both of those tracks make me think of Indiana Jones.
Yeah, I definitely think you're kind of right there. I'm not ashamed to admit that I have only ever seen the 4th Indiana Jones movie.
Dear Lord.
Warp 5.
What's your favorite episode of Enterprise?
I usually say Strange New World. The first part of Strange New World just reminds me so much of being a kid and growing up in southeastern Oklahoma and the mountains and the woods. And I just imagine what it would be like to go camping on an alien planet.
Meta Treks.
And that's the world of language that we live in. It's not this purely referential sense of language. Like when Riker says a minuet, he doesn't just mean, oh yeah, that thing minuet that I can point to, whatever that is on the holodeck, right?
A 17th century French dance. Maybe he wants to dance.
Riker wants to bust.
And that's what else is happening on Trek.fm.
You can listen to every show on the network at Trek.fm with links for iTunes, streaming services, and a direct download link. This episode of Earl Grey is brought to you by Audible.com, offering more than 150,000 titles for iPhone, iPod, iPad, Kindle, Android, Windows phones, plus Mac or PC. To get a free audiobook of your choice, visit audibletrial.com/TrekFM. Thank you, Audible, for supporting Earl Grey and Trek FM. If you are a weekly listener and would like to directly help Earl Grey, please consider becoming a patron of Trek FM. That's how I got started. At patreon.com/TrekFM, you can choose a pledge level and receive rewards for becoming a Trek FM patron. You will be inside the observation lounge of our network, able to participate in our monthly patron roundtable podcasts and supporting the production of all our great content. We would like to take this moment to thank our current Patreon associate producers, Stephen Boyd, Michael Hueter, and Ron Saarna. Thank you for supporting Earl Grey. Connect with other Trek FM listeners on our Facebook discussion group called The Babel Conference, found through the Facebook search field, or like the facebook.com/TrekFM page for show updates and announcements. The network is also on Twitter at TrekFM. If you would like to contact Lee, Richard, or me, Amy, visit trek.fm/contact to send us a subspace message or find us on social media. So, Richard, where can people find you on the internet?
Well, they can find me on the Babel Conference. I pop in here and there. I'll cause a little trouble here and there, or at least try not to. And I'm also on Twitter at xransom.
And Lee, where can people contact you?
Yeah, you can find me at Lee_Nostromo. You can find me at Star Trek VHS, my dedicated Twitter account to all that forgotten Star Trek VHS artwork collection that I've curated over the years. And yeah, you can find me on my own podcast, Filibuster, where I talk about nerd and geek culture, sometimes talk about Star Trek a bit more broadly in terms of the movies and all kind of, indie movies, everything in between. So yeah, you can find me there.
All right, and you can find me at Twitter at Miss Amy Nelson, but you can mostly find me on the Babel Conference. That's where I like hanging out. So join us next time for another cup of Earl Grey. Great joy and gratitude.
It is a good day to die.
Let's see what's out there.